Hello, listeners. If you can hear and see this, it means you're breathing and you're alive. Well done. If you're new here, consider subscribing. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, let's begin. The call came on a Tuesday, or maybe a Wednesday, time already starting to blur in the sterile office light. The Archdiocese explained it was a matter of spiritual support for a small international research team stationed on the Ross Ice Shelf, a temporary assignment to minister to souls isolated in that white desert. They said the previous chaplain had suffered a sudden breakdown, was on his way home babbling about pressure and whispers. They needed a steady hand, a man of fortified faith. I was, apparently, that man. I accepted, not out of grand missionary zeal, but because my faith felt like a quiet, dusty room at the time, and I thought the immense silence of Antarctica might be a good place to clean it. The journey was a series of progressively smaller, louder, and colder vehicles, ending in a shuddering twin otter that deposited me onto a landscape that defied description. It wasn't just white, it was a screaming, infinite blankness that swallowed sound and scale whole. The base, a cluster of low, utilitarian modules huddled together like frightened beetles, was a profound relief. The first week was a period of adjustment, a slow tuning of the human instrument to a new harsh key. The cold was a physical entity, a sharp-toothed creature that waited just outside the heavy doors. The sun circled the sky in a lazy, endless loop, denying the night, messing with the soul's internal clock. My congregation was 23 scientists and support staff, a mix of nationalities and disciplines, all united by a focused, pragmatic energy that left little room for the metaphysical. I held small services in the common room, mostly attended out of polite ritual. I made myself useful, helping in the kitchen, listening to technical jargon I didn't understand. It was peaceful, in a stark, demanding way. Then, on the 10th day, Dr. Aris Thalberg, the glaciologist, invited me to see their primary find. He was a serious Finnish man with eyes the color of the ice under cloud. He said it was a matter of logistical interest, as they would be working near the site and I should know the terrain. We suited up and took a snow crawler, a noisy and heated bubble that moved across the void. After 40 minutes of featureless travel, he stopped near a series of flags marking a deep, narrow crevasse. "We're drilling a core here," he explained, his voice tinny through my headset. "The ice layers are like a history book, but we found something adjacent." He led me to the edge. Powerful lamps were set up, throwing a surgical light down into the blue-veined depths. And there it was. It wasn't a dinosaur, not a ship, nothing recognizable. It was a shape, a massive, distorted outline suspended in the clear, ancient ice about 50 feet down. The ice magnified and warped it, but the contours were all wrong. It seemed to have too many angles, planes that didn't reconcile with each other, like a crystal grown according to a geometry that made my eyes water if I stared too long. Parts of it seemed almost fleshy, or like dark, polished stone, and other sections hinted at structures that could have been limbs or spines, or something else entirely. It was huge, maybe the size of a bus, but its form refused to settle in my mind. Thalberg's voice was clinical. "The ice around it is over 300,000 years old. It's not organic, not as we define it. The composition is odd, a kind of silicate carbon matrix that's incredibly dense. And it's emitting something. Not radiation, not heat. A very low-frequency pulsation. We can't interpret it." I asked what he thought it was. He was silent for a long time, watching the lights play over that impossible shape. "An artifact," he said finally, the word hanging in the frozen air. "Or a specimen. Either way, it's not of this world." The sight of it, that silent, imprisoned wrongness in the ice, did something to me. The quiet, dusty room of my faith was suddenly filled with a chilling draft from somewhere utterly unknown. I began to have trouble sleeping. Not because of the midnight sun, but because when I closed my eyes, I saw those non-Euclidean lines. The atmosphere in the base shifted palpably. The focused energy of the scientists turned into a tense, giddy obsession. Everyone was talking about the specimen or the object. A team from a corporate sponsor, Genodyne, arrived, crisp men and women in black cold weather gear who took over a whole module. Security protocols appeared. Certain areas became restricted. My access as the spiritual counselor was subtly but firmly revoked. I was told it was for safety, that the emissions might have psychological effects. I heard whispers about the previous chaplain again, his breakdown, and a cold knot formed in my stomach. I started noticing things. The head of the Genodyne team, a man named Carver, had a smile that never touched his eyes. The researchers, once jovial during meals, now spoke in hushed, rapid clusters, falling silent when I approached. One of the marine biologists, a young woman named Alara, began attending my services regularly. She never spoke, just sat in the back, her hands clenched tightly. 2 nights after my visit to the crevasse, she knocked on my door. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. She didn't come in, just pressed a folded piece of paper into my gloved hand and walked quickly away. I unfolded it. It was a list, handwritten in a shaky script. Rules for the night watch. Do not look directly at the monitor feed from Sector 7 for more than 10 consecutive seconds. If the audio feed from the deep ice core picks up a humming sound, disconnect it immediately and report the frequency to Carver, but only after 1 hour has passed. The perimeter sensors will show false blips to the southeast. Ignore them. The real breach will come from the direction of the magnetic north. If you see a shadow in the modules that seems deeper than it should be, turn on all the lights in the room and recite the Lord's Prayer backwards. You will hear it in your head. That is normal. Do not acknowledge it out loud. The coffee in the galley after 2 a.m. will taste like salt and copper. Do not drink it. If a colleague insists you try the coffee, they are already compromised. Lock yourself in your quarters. At exactly 3:33 a.m., the main generator will fluctuate. Do not go to check it. The thing in the ice dreams, and we are in its dream. The goal is not to wake it. I read the list 3 times, a creeping horror seeping into my bones. This wasn't a joke. The specificity, the sheer bizarre terror of it, felt like a cry for help from a mind grappling with something incomprehensible. I went to find Alara, but she was in her lab, acting perfectly normal, refusing to meet my gaze. When I tried to ask her about the note, she denied all knowledge, her voice a tight wire. That night, I decided to test one thing. I stayed up, watching the clock. At 3:33 a.m. precisely, the lights in my module dimmed for a full 3 seconds, and a low groan vibrated through the floor from the direction of the generator room. I did not go to check. The next day, I tried to speak with Thalberg. He looked aged, hollowed out. I mentioned the rules cautiously. His face shut down completely. "Do not engage with that superstition, Father," he said sharply. "The isolation, the emissions, they can cause shared paranoid ideation. Ignore it. Focus on your duties." But his eyes were darting around, never resting on mine. I began keeping my own vigil. I noticed Carver's men were always wearing thin, wireless earpieces. I saw one of them, during a meal, suddenly tilt his head as if listening to something, his expression going blank for a moment before he resumed eating. The false camaraderie of the base was cracking, revealing a deep, frightened machinery underneath. I started having the dream. It was always the same. I was standing at the edge of the crevasse, looking down at the shape. But in the dream, the ice was perfectly clear, like glass. And the thing was not distorted. I could see its full, awful symmetry. It was a nest of interlocking angles, a sculpture of frozen thought, and at its center was a pulsating, dark node that felt like an eye. And it was aware of me. It didn't speak, but its awareness pressed against my mind, a cold, alien pressure that was neither hostile nor friendly, just utterly other. I would wake up gasping, the taste of salt and copper in my mouth. After one such dream, I stumbled to the small sink in my quarters to wash my face. The water that came out of the tap was tinged a faint, rusty brown, and it tasted of metal and salt. I spat it out, my heart hammering against my ribs. Rule number 5. The coffee in the galley after 2 a.m. will taste like salt and copper. It wasn't just the coffee. It was the water. It was everything. The thing was seeping into the base, into the very pipes. A slow contamination. I became paranoid, ritualistic. I avoided looking at any monitor screens for long. I recited prayers forwards and backwards under my breath. I watched my colleagues, looking for signs. The young technician, who always offered me coffee, now seemed to have a fixed, glassy smile. I stopped going to the galley after dinner. The isolation became absolute, a prison of my own watchfulness. Then the incidents began. A geologist was found wandering near the perimeter fence in nothing but his thermal underwear, mumbling about the beautiful angles. He was sedated and flown out on the next supply plane. A series of power failures crippled the non-essential modules, always starting in Sector 7, the module closest to the data center processing the emissions from the ice. The Genodyne team became more aggressive, asserting control. They started round-the-clock drilling operations at the crevasse, using a thermal lance to melt the ice around the shape. Thalberg argued violently with Carver, saying they were moving too fast, that they didn't understand what they were doing. Carver dismissed him, talking about proprietary timelines and shareholder value. I felt a terrible certainty growing within me. They were going to wake it up. The final descent began during a storm. Not a storm of snow, but a sudden vicious electrostatic disturbance that played havoc with all electronics. The radios spat static. The lights flickered and strobed. In the chaos, the containment protocols around the crevasse site failed. An alarm started blaring, a whooping sound that was barely audible over the screeching in the speakers. I was in my quarters, praying, when the door burst open. It was Alara. She was sobbing, her nose bleeding a thin, dark trickle. "It's free," she choked out. "The ice, they melted through. It's not a body. It's a seed, or a door. And it's open." Then she collapsed. I dragged her inside, barricaded the door with my desk. The alarms died suddenly, leaving an awful ringing silence broken only by the howling wind outside. Then a new sound began. A deep, subsonic hum that I felt in my teeth and in the marrow of my bones. It vibrated through the floor, through the walls. It was the sound from the rules, the sound we were supposed to disconnect. But it was everywhere now. I looked at the digital clock on my wall. It was flashing 3:33. The power went out completely, plunging us into darkness lit only by the emergency glow strips on the floor. The hum grew louder, resolving into a kind of pattern, a rhythmic, pulsing intonation that was almost a language. And with it came the pressure, the same awareness from my dream, but now unleashed, filling the base, pressing against the walls of my mind. I heard screaming, short and then abruptly cut off. Running footsteps, then silence. A thud against my door, once, twice, then nothing. I crouched next to Alara, who was unconscious, and I did the only thing I could think to do. I began to pray. Not the formal prayers of my office, but a raw, desperate plea into the smothering dark and the crushing hum. I prayed for protection, for deliverance, for the souls of everyone here. And as I prayed, I felt the alien attention focus on me. It was like being scanned by a light made of frozen needles. It found the shape of my faith, the architecture of my belief, and it did not understand it. The pressure intensified, a psychic weight trying to crush my consciousness into a shape that could comprehend its reality. My nose began to bleed. My vision swam. I kept praying, my words becoming a frantic mantra against the humming void. Then, a miracle, or a coincidence. I'd brought a small vial of holy water, a sentimental token. It was in my pocket. My clutching hand broke the vial, the water mixing with my blood. The hum in my head spiked, then flinched back. The pressure eased, just for a moment. The thing, for all its impossible power, reacted to this symbol, this tiny concentration of sanctified matter, with something like rejection. It was a crack in its reality. I knew then I couldn't fight it, but I could reject its dream. I focused everything I had, every ounce of my frayed belief, not on attacking the presence, but on building a wall around my own mind, a small, quiet room of familiar human thought. I thought of sunlight on stone, of the smell of old books, of the simple weight of a rosary in my hand. Mundane, human things. The alien pressure pushed, but it could not find a purchase on those ordinary memories. It was like oil on water. The hum changed pitch, becoming frustrated, dissonant. I heard Carver's voice then, not through the door, but in my head, clear and ecstatic and utterly insane. Behold the geometry of truth. See the beautiful angles. His mental voice was a scream of rapturous agony. Then it was cut off. Silence fell. The deep hum receded, pulling back, withdrawing. The emergency lights flickered back on. The storm of static was gone. An hour passed in absolute quiet. I finally risked moving, peering out the reinforced window of my door. The corridor was empty. I ventured out. The base was a tomb. I found people, or what was left of them. Some were dead, frozen in positions of terror or twisted into poses that defied anatomy. Others were catatonic, staring at walls, tracing impossible patterns in the air with their fingers. Thalberg was in the control room, his eyes open but unseeing, a line of drool frozen on his chin. Carver was at the crevasse site. They had to identify him by his dog tags. His body was found folded into a shape that should have been impossible for the human skeleton, a grotesque imitation of the angles we saw in the ice. The thing itself was gone. Not melted, not dug out. Just gone. The ice around where it had been was smooth, vitrified, as if heated to an instant, impossible polish. It had simply left, or unfolded itself from our reality. I was the only one seemingly untouched, save for the bleeding nose and a migraine that felt like my skull was split. I used the base's damaged but functional long-range radio to call for help. My report was a mess of contradictions, of shock and sanctioned lies. I spoke of a catastrophic equipment failure, a chain reaction, psychological trauma from the isolation. The official investigation would later blame a combination of toxic fumes from the thermal lance and mass hysteria. Genodyne sealed its records. The survivors, those who could be revived, remembered little. Elara never woke up. She remains in a facility somewhere, her brain activity showing strange, sharp peaks and valleys that look disturbingly like the emission readings from the ice. They sent me home. My superiors called me resilient, blessed. They gave me a quiet parish in a landlocked, forested place, as far from white horizons as possible. They think I witnessed a tragedy. I did. But I witnessed something else too. I know the truth. The thing in the ice was not a creature. It was an idea, a thought from a mind so alien that its mere dream nearly unmade us. It was a set of rules written in a geometry of madness, and we broke the most important one. We woke it up, and it left, but it didn't go far. Sometimes, on very still nights, when the wind dies and the world is too quiet, I can feel a faint, distant hum in the foundations of my church. I taste a hint of salt and copper in the communion wine, and I know, with a certainty that chills me more than any Antarctic wind ever could, that it's still dreaming. And now, we are all inside its dream. The rules were not to protect us from it. They were to protect it from noticing us. And we failed. So I keep my own rules now. I never look at patterned tiles for too long. I avoid certain angles in architecture. I recite my prayers forwards and backwards. And I wait, and I listen, and I try very, very hard not to think in straight lines.